Genesis 1, 2 through 4, Genesis 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 4, and excerpts from Genesis, chapters 6 to 9, and selections, and Genesis 11, 1 through 9. And this is on the insert in your program. Let's see if I can start at the beginning. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, God said, "Let there be light." And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters." And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place." Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation." And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky." And God said, "Let the waters bring forth living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures." Then God said, "Let us make humankind." God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and God said to Noah, "Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. I am going to bring a flood on the earth. Everything on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And you shall bring 2 of every kind of living thing into the ark. Also take every kind of food." Noah did all that God commanded him. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. Noah removed the covering of the ark and saw that the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, so that they may abound on the earth." Then God said to Noah and to those with him, "I am establishing my covenant with you and with every living creature. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. This is the sign of the covenant. My bow in the clouds shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." Genesis 11, 1 through 9. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower." And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Come, let us confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Thus ends the reading for the morning.
I noticed I had given my sermon today a title, All the Earth, and indeed I wrote that title almost a week ago. And that theme is indeed in the background of what I'll be saying today. Because I think that our attention to all that is around us is a key part of our spiritual lives. But what I wanted to talk about today, in the end, was this idea that we're entering a season. We're entering a season, certainly in the calendar year, certainly in our church here, certainly in our social and political lives, in our individual lives as well. And with a new season comes an invitation to transformation. Now, transformation can be dangerous. It can be alluring. It can be sacred. A transformation is a time when things change, not necessarily in a way that we initiate, but in a way that disrupts our ordinary sense of how things go. We're all familiar with this. The birth of a new child is a transformation in a family. When the child goes to school, the family changes again. When the children grow up and have their own children, the family changes again. And when someone dies, the family changes. These are all transformations that, on some level, we do not initiate. We may choose to have a child, but just how that child will be in our lives, well, we don't quite know how it happens, but it's certainly not something that we control. In general, a transformation, I'm thinking in the big sense of transformation here, it's something that happens when the spirit, the mind, the heart, the body, everything adapts to a change. We get ready to change, and we find a way to change. I spent some time this week with a book by Susan Beaumont called How to Lead. And the title continues, When You Don't Know Where You're Going. And she talked in that book about caring for souls, our own souls, each other's souls, the soul of the community. She called it tending souls. And I like that idea of tending because I think of tending a garden. It has a nurturing aspect to it, and it says, when we tend a soul, we help it to grow in its own best way. In its own best way. And that's true for our church. It's true for each one of us. It's true for each group we belong to. And as we tend our souls, we see if we can sense the essence of a person, the essence of a time, a place, an organization. We're kind of seeking to sense what is authentic. Now, when we are invited into a transformation, we recognize that a transformation has three parts, or this is one way to look at it. Three parts. The first is maybe called separation. Something ends. Something that was no longer is. Something that happened no longer happens. And this separation can happen for an individual, it can happen for a group, it can happen for a whole society. The identity, the sense of place in the world, these things are disrupted. And we find ourselves in the second part of the process. It's this in-between season. It's a time of disorientation. We wonder, who am I? Who are we? Who are we together? It's a season when new identities, new senses of self are explored, new possibilities are considered. And the third part is reorientation. So after a struggle, or after effort of some kind, after attention, after experimentation, after opening our eyes and our ears and our hearts, something new emerges. We adopt a new sense of who we are. We recognize that we have changed, and we start to be able to talk about who we've become. And we plan new ways of doing things that are appropriate to our new circumstances. When your child goes off to kindergarten, you no longer have to be there for the morning nap. You have a piece of time that somehow is different. You start to find new ways to be. Now, this 3-step process decision makes it sound kind of neat and orderly. It's not. All these parts can go on together. You can be in transformation in one sense and in another sense completely unchanged. And there are both opportunity and danger in this time of transformation. In some ways, we are freed. We release old ways of doing things. We get to explore new territory. We get to sense where is the energy, the action, the power in this new situation. And this in-between season, social scientists call it a liminal season. Limen comes from Latin, and it means threshold. It's that space where the door divides one room from the next, or the outside from the inside. It's stepping over a threshold. So that liminal time is a long pause on the doorstep. And social scientists, Arnold van Gennep, first studied this looking at rituals in traditional cultures. And it kind of languished there in the academic literature until the 1960s, when anthropologist Victor Turner started to write about liminality, not just in terms of formal ritual, these cultural moments of great transition, but the kinds of processes that go on in all the aspects of social and human life. One thing that Turner talked about, which I'm not going to spend much time on today, but maybe in a later week, is that he says this liminal time can be a troubling season because we can be subject to the lure of tricksters. These are people who bring false pathways or movements that serve no useful purpose. But eventually, liminality will find resolution. The new time emerges. We are reoriented. Now, we've been talking a bit about our history as a church, a local church here, 100 years old this year. We'll sing a hymn that's new to us today at the end of the service that talks a little bit about that. But when this church was founded, Mill Valley was a relatively new city. It was in the years after World War I when society had been disrupted in many ways. And many people moved to Mill Valley to reestablish their lives in new places, in this new place with new people. It was a liminal season for them. One of the challenges of a liminal time is that we do tend to look back on our history. And it's really the only thing that's clear, right? The history is clear. What's not clear is what we're doing right now or where we're going to end up. But we may think we have clarity, but we have to avoid a couple of temptations. One of them is to romanticize or glamorize an earlier era, remembering how wonderful everything was, blocking out negative experiences. What's important as we draw on our history is to remember stories that teach important values for this moment, for this time, this season. And we draw on those to shape a hope-filled future. We had 3 stories. We've had 3 stories this month, and we've gone into them in relative depth each week. And we heard excerpts from those 3 passages this morning. These are 3 mythic stories that have shaped our religious tradition, shaped our understanding of transformation. And these are stories that are known throughout the culture. People have mostly at least heard of Let There Be Light, or Noah's Ark, or the Tower of Babel. And if we read these stories with this idea of liminal seasons in mind, we might notice different things than we did the first and second and 10th and 30th time we heard those stories. First, of course, is that all of these stories are about transformation. In all of these stories, earth is central. Humans are not abstract figures that live in a spiritual world without hunger or without rain. One of the words that Susan Beaumont used in talking about transformation and about how we emerge she said, we emerge out of chaos, and that's usually our sense of this Genesis story. There is a certain chaos in the life of the church in relation to this story. I referred to it a couple of weeks ago, talking about how people have tried to read this as a literal description of what happened. Because there is a kind of spiritual upheaval that happens when we recognize that this 3-tiered understanding of the earth does not fit with our contemporary scientific understanding of God in heaven and humanity on earth and an underworld of depth. We no longer see it that way. And in its place, God is present within and among us. God is grounded, so you might say. That's what Diana Butler Bass says. God is in relationship with space and time and nature and with us. We understand God. One way we understand God, there are many ways we understand God, but one way we can understand God is as the love that connects all things. So rather than a distant God who points and says, do this, do that, we understand God as immanent. And so in our churches, and surely in ours as well, we seek new pathways to unfold this understanding of God, a God that is simultaneously worldly and mystical and near. Now in Genesis 6 through 9, the Noah story, this is almost a textbook story of transformation, right? So God comes and says, okay, I'm going to flood the earth, but you're going to build an ark. and they build an ark, and they have this liminal time on the ark. Probably a time that's very disorienting. I mean, imagine life on the ark. Let go of practicalities and just imagine it. All of the social hierarchies that existed don't make sense. Yes, we have Noah and wife and sons, and I wish we had their names, and daughters-in-law. I imagine there were actually more people than that, because where you have sons and daughters-in-law, you often have grandchildren. When you have a family in this time, you often have relatives who live with you. You often have people who work with you in your home or on your farm. So I imagine there were more people. But at any rate, so the task of the humans in this time is to care for all the other creatures. They've brought the food on board, and they've got to feed all these other creatures. What did it take to figure out how to do that? Do you have a schedule? Who does what? Who goes to which animal? This is truly what you would call a liminal time, but they make it through. They make it through with all the animals, and they endure this flood, this time of being closed up in this ark. And then the season ends, and there they are at Ararat. And they come out of the ark, and they emerge from the ark into a new time and a new space. So this is a classic story because this liminal season is resolved. What was ambiguous becomes clear. They're back on dry land. What was disorienting has allowed a reorientation. It must have been kind of exciting, a time of great innovation on that ark, figuring out how are we going to do all this? All the energy of the people and the animals. I'm sure that experimentation was there as well. Now, our third story, the story of the Tower of Babel. Transformation is in this story, but not necessarily in such a clear way, because we have a group of people who have been traveling, and they settle. So there's the change. They're in a new place, and they decide to build a city. They decide to build a tower. So they've gone through this liminal phase. If you heard the whole story last week, they fired bricks and they gathered bitumen to stick them together. Bitumen, tar. And then in the midst of this comes another disruption, because God says, we're going to confuse everything. They're going to have many languages, and I'm going to scatter them over the face of all the earth. God wants humans all over the earth, it seems. And if they were allowed to speak one language, they would just stick together. And so if they were speaking multiple languages, they might move on and organize themselves in different ways. So their initial emergence in their new city is disrupted. And the story seems to leave us in a state of disruption, because all we know is that the people were scattered. All we know is that they're speaking different languages. We don't know how things move from there. Now, if we think about soul tending, if we think about a liminal season, what we see is that what is new, what will come new, is not yet apparent. We can't hear it, see it, taste it, touch it. There are many ideas, there are many new foods to test and new words to try out pronouncing and all of these things. But we don't have a consensus about a way forward. But eventually, liminality will find resolution. There will be reorientation. No single person can manage the process. No single leader can say, let there be light. Transformation doesn't work that way, especially communal transformation. We're reminded that our Christian story, not just the creation and Noah's Ark and Tower of Babel, throughout the scriptures, Jewish and Christian, in the general sense of the Christian story, it's always an ongoing journey. I guess this is why I said it's not like things, it's a clear-cut process. We are always in various aspects of this process of transformation. The invitation holds every day, an invitation to transformation. Richard Rohr said that this threshold is God's waiting room. He says, here we are taught openness and patience. But this liminal state is one that we tend to resist, partly because this liminal state begins with an ending. It begins with a loss, a change that we did not determine. We resist knowing, or rather, we resist not knowing. We don't like not yet. It feels like a loss of control over our own destiny. But again, Susan Beaumont tells us that this is a dangerous, alluring, and sacred time. Dangerous because of the uncertainty. Dangerous because some things fall apart. Dangerous because we may have existential fear. We face a collapse of order. We face chaos. Our status isn't clear. The continuity of what we have known is in question. So who are we? At the same time, this liminal time is alluring because it can be shaped. It invites experimentation. It invites risk-taking. It invites questions, originality, creativity. We grow in our sense of agency as individuals and as a community. We are free, in a sense, to discover a future that doesn't have to continue the past, can bring along the parts that make sense and simply leave others behind. So dangerous and alluring, but also sacred. Because in this time, something different can happen in a community. Beaumont uses the word communitas, and I haven't looked to see all the places where that word comes from. But communitas, in her words, it's an unstructured community in which people are equal. There is a spirit of community. There is a sense of common humanity. We can ignore the old ways we did things. We don't have to do it that way anymore. We have a sense of fellowship, a sense of connection with each other, a sense of being part of something together, a sense of belonging. We can be more spontaneous. We can have a new recognition of our interrelatedness. We've all experienced something like this. Think about going on a trip with some people, and as you travel, you're finding yourself doing new things as other people are too. You find yourselves taking different roles in the group. You find yourself and yourselves creating new ways of doing things. So this metaphor of the Christian life, the spiritual life, any spiritual life really, not just Christian, as a journey, fits in this way. Now, one of the things that we want to remember is that in this time, in this season of transformation, that true beginnings, something new truly emerging, is going to follow not our plan, but the timing of spirit, of mind, of heart, maybe even of body. Some days we're just too tired. But we are ready to move out into a liminal season and recognize that this is a season, and we are coming into a new chapter of our life together. So these stories, the stories we heard this morning, these are part of our invitation to transformation, part of our invitation to liminality, to that time where we can pause and say, oh. We can pause in awe and wonder. We can pause in curiosity and in hope, in love, in joy. These earthy stories, they are our invitation to transformation. They're dangerous, they're alluring, and they are sacred. Amen.